And welcome back to Reunited States, the podcast where we bring rational discourse back to our national dialogue. From Manchester, New Hampshire, I'm Jesse Saywell.
And from Los Angeles, California, my name is Tyler Ehrig.
And wow, do we have a lot to talk about this week, Tyler. We're seemingly never running out of things to talk about. But I think the first thing I want to touch on is, I know both of us went to protests on No King's Day, otherwise known as Trump's birthday party day, this past weekend. Mine was in Manchester, of course, yours in Los Angeles. I suspect yours was much larger than mine in terms of the number of people, though I will say that the Manchester protest, if you look at the population, like the percentage of the population, it was pretty striking. So it was very interesting, in many ways very inspiring to see so many like-minded people, both in my community and across the country, who are upset about this. I have plenty of thoughts about it. I have one that may be a little bit controversial of sorts. But I'm curious, what was the experience like for you out in LA? What did it feel like?
It was great. I decided to go to the downtown LA one, the biggest protest area in Los Angeles, in the Civic Center around City Hall and around the building where ICE is actually operating out of and all these things. And it was a great time. Unsurprising to me, but maybe surprising to people who perhaps view certain types of news. It was extremely peaceful. There was not a single incident that I witnessed. There was no violence, there was no looting, no any of that stuff. And nothing like that happened anywhere around that area. It was quite literally just a congregation of people, the largest congregation of people I've ever seen filling Grand Park. I've never seen that many people in Grand Park across the street from City Hall ever in my life. And I've lived here my entire life. I've never seen that many people in that area ever. It was insanely massive. We took the train. A few friends of mine took the train there, and obviously everyone on the train, 99% of them are all going to protest. They all have their signs and masks and everything that's necessary to protect themselves. And it was great. I mean, it was a great experience. Obviously, there were a lot of hilarious signs, which is always entertaining. I know I shared a bunch of them with you, and you shared a bunch with me that you saw. And that's always entertaining. That's always fun. But the real essence of why we're there was definitely felt at my protest, at least. It really felt like the people who were there were there for the right reason, and that we got our message across, or we hope we got our message across. We definitely did the best we could. Last week we talked a lot about what we need to see, leadership, things like that, in order to make any kind of movement really effective. And while we still are kind of struggling on the leadership part, likely will for a while, I did see the other element of that, which is the unified voice and the peace and that perfect exercising of your First Amendment right. The way it was done and the way people were there, and the respect that they had for others and for obviously law enforcement. I mean, there's plenty of people yelling at the National Guard and stuff. I saw plenty of that, but they're not physically, harming these individuals. They're very much just exercising their First Amendment right the way that we were meant to do it, which is with our voices. And so it was a great time. How was yours?
It was great. Similar in terms of vibes, obviously smaller in scale, but for us, LA has the distinction of course, already having been protesting significantly relating to ICE, and there was a lot of discussion of ICE at our protest, of course, plenty of signs, I like my ICE crushed, all of that stuff. The tone was different in New Hampshire, because for us, it really is, we're the live free or die state. And I have to say that motto feels like it's taking a new meaning, or maybe coming up with an old meaning of the motto. But it is really, on No King's Day, it was about the not wanting a king. because New England, as my sign said, New Hampshire, opposing kings since 1776, because in January of 1776 we declared ourselves in support of independence, one of the first colonies to do so. And but New England, of course, we don't like kings, haven't liked kings for a long time, and so that was certainly the focus. Overall, a very successful, again, completely peaceful. There were several kind of agitators, Trump people who showed up trying to start shit. And fortunately, the leaders of the protests kind of came through and just said, hey, don't engage with these people. That's what they want. You know, there was one car that kept just driving around. It was two kids who didn't even look like they're old enough to vote. These young guys with like 8 MAGA hats, you know, in the front of the car. And they just keep flipping us off and all of this and whatever. And we just ignored them for the most part, which was good. So I thought it was very productive. I think the one thing, there was one moment that did frustrate me, and this is not going to be a surprise hearing me say this, but the Palestine people showed up. And when I say the Palestine people, I don't mean Palestinian people. I mean people protesting or kind of counter-protesting what we were protesting about. And they plant themselves throughout the crowd, and they just start shouting, "Where were you all for Palestine?" And they, start spewing, and the entire mood changes immediately at this protest. And the one guy says it again, "Where were you all for Palestine?" And I couldn't help myself. I just shouted back in the silence, "Trying to stop Trump from winning." Which, got a couple of people, clapping and whatever, but there was largely just like fear of these people, and it changed the entire mood to the point where eventually they realized that they had distracted the entire discussion away, and the one person just said, "Sorry, I didn't mean to kill the mood," and then they finally left, which that was humorous. I at least appreciated that. But again, this was obnoxious. We're not protesting the same things. I understand that the Palestine issue is a serious issue that matters to a lot of people. And again, I care about that issue, but to go hijack kind of this moment that is about something else and try and shame people, I just didn't think that was especially productive. And that goes into another thing that I've thought about with the protests at large, specifically in Los Angeles recently, that I actually hadn't thought about this at all. But I heard it on a podcast from someone, and I kind of shrugged it off. And a couple days later, I heard it from someone that I would say is probably to the left of me. They didn't want to say it publicly. They told me privately, but they said the same thing. And then I heard it from a Mexican-American friend of mine who also, kind of said the same exact thing. And it had not dawned on me what it was the idea that potentially the number of Mexican flags versus the number of American flags, at least in how it was represented. And I saw the pictures I saw over the weekend, I thought actually changed. I saw a lot of American flags in LA. But in the initial protest, there was this theory about, does the number of Mexican flags undercut the argument? Undercut the argument of these people belong in America. And there are I heard it on a podcast. I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. But then I started hearing it from people who I consider to be, probably to the left of me politically. And so I was curious about it. And the more it lingered, I start to think that there is a point to that. And that's not to say there shouldn't be pride and representation of where you are from. But if the purpose is to oppose people getting shipped back against their will to countries, some of whom have never come from these countries, but many of whom, are from other countries. I guess the concern is, I had heard recently Richie Torres, representative of New York. He is a first generation American. representative in Congress, and he said that the left needs to take back patriotism, and needs to do so because there has never been a nation that has been advanced through a lack of patriotism. Now, an excess of patriotism leads into nationalism and a whole bunch of other problems. But the left, and specifically these protest movements, could potentially benefit from leaning into patriotism a little bit more. And I understand that it's very popular and it's important for us to critique the country. But as you and I have said on this podcast before many times, I love this country. I care about it very much, and I want it to be better. I see its flaws, but I also see the things that it's done well. So, I get it in terms of the number of flags of other countries. I don't understand the Palestine flags showing up. I will admit that. Specifically, the Hamas flags, not interested in that. But I was curious. I have been sitting here thinking about that for several days, whether the number of Mexican flags in the LA protests, if that's causing if that is undercutting the argument in any way. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great point. I had not thought about it. And right now I'm thinking, as you were talking, I'm thinking back to the ratio of flags that I saw at the protests in downtown Los Angeles. And I will say this. I'll kind of talk a little bit out loud about kind of like the different flags I saw without kind of going too far into it. Because I would say there were 3 types of flags that we saw. There was an American flag, there was a foreign flag, and there was an upside-down American flag. Those are the 3 types of flags that you saw at the protest. In LA, certainly. You either saw an American flag right side up, the way it's supposed to be. You saw that same flag except upside down. Or you saw a flag from either Mexico, Guatemala, or El Salvador. Those are the 3 most common flags, non-U.S. flags that you saw in support of, migrant Americans. And there were some Palestinians. There were like 2. I think I saw 2, which again, that's like an astronomically low number because we were thousands of people there. So that's not really nothing. I did see like 2, but like they weren't yelling like you said yours were or anything. They were just kind of there. Don't really care. Although I will say the other type of flag, I don't know if this kind of groups in, and this is, I'll talk about this. Actually, I'll talk about that later. So we had those 3 types of flags, and I don't think the I don't think the foreign flags undercut the argument. I do think the upside down American flags do. I understand why people do that because they're upset with the government. They are opposed to what the government is doing, and that flag can, right now at least, kind of be seen as a representation of the government, even though it's meant to be a representation of the people. It's not really seen that way right now. And so I understand why people do it. I do think that actively hurts the argument because that is, an open opposition to what is meant to be the country, right? That's like opposition to the country, not opposition to the government, even though it may feel that way right now. I do think that hurt. However, I don't think that the flags of communities in which that have family that migrated here hurts the argument because most of those folks that had those flags were either flying 2 flags, Mexican and American flag, or they had that kind of neat, you've probably seen it, that like hybrid flag where it's like it's half and half, kind of split diagonally across the center.
Yeah.
Where like, the top right corner is America, top left or bottom left corner is Mexico or something like that. And I think those flags are my favorite flags, actually.
I would agree. I think those are very effective.
Represent exactly what was meant to be represented by both waving the American or a foreign flag, is that we are unified. We are the same. And so I saw a lot of people waving both flags, and I think in a vacuum, if it were just foreign flags and like a grand minority of American flags, I think it would be kind of an issue. because there's the absence of patriotism in that sense, and that can kind of be seen in a different light by those who are more concerned about the view of America by these folks, especially people in blue cities. But I think having them in the ratio that I saw them, which were kind of very like 50-50, like maybe there was a slightly higher ratio, but it was not something that was very apparent. Having them be as nearly identical as you can see, like for every American flag, you did see at least one foreign flag. I think that ratio, looking at it looking at aerial pictures of the entire movement, is actually helpful. It's helpful to have both there in those equal amounts that we were kind of lucky to see, because that kind of, to me, indicates what is meant to be said by waving a flag, which is we belong together. I'm waving a Mexican flag here in America because Mexicans belong in America, because we belong here, as do Guatemalans, as do Salvadorians, whatever, right? Other South Americans, Colombians, Peruvians. I saw a bunch of different like random one-off flags as well. Unfortunately, no Bolivians. Actually, it's a funny story. There were a bunch of flag vendors at the event, right? They're selling it for like $20-$30 or whatever, giant flag. And I was like, that's a great deal. I want to buy a flag. And everywhere I go, my family being from Bolivia, everywhere I go, I'm like, hey, I'm speaking to them in Spanish. I'm asking them, hey, do you have Bolivia? And everyone's looking at me like curious, like, no, why the fuck would I have that? And I'm like, because I am. And he goes, yeah, but like, do you guys have like undocumented migrants here? And I'm like, well, no, but I want to support my family, my people. And they're like, yeah, no, sorry, we're only holding like the countries that actually have a majority of undocumented citizens here. And I'm like, you know what? That's fair. Like from
might have a few.
From a capitalist perspective, that's fair, I guess. Whatever. Point is there were a lot of. I think there was a really good ratio of those flags, and I think that gives a better sense of like unity and belonging, because again, you're waving your flag on American soil as if to say I belong here. So I do actually think it was a good thing to see them together. I think it's helped that they were in pretty equal amounts. And I think that is more helpful than if it were just American flags. I think it would actually be harmful the same way purely Mexican flags would be harmful. I think having everyone wave an American flag as opposed to any other type of flag would inspire the wrong message, especially when you consider, again, what the general population kind of sees the American flag as representing. Not so much, well, I should say within the country, what they represents. Not so much I love the country right now as much as this is a representation of the United States leadership and the government, right? And what we represent. And I think right now the better message, just thinking kind of sociologically, the better message is having them together to signify the unity rather than solidarity with one or the other.
That's interesting. No, it's a really, really good set of points. Yeah, I also saw the upside down American flag quite a bit. I don't know how I feel about that one. But I was curious to hear your thoughts. I think it's interesting. I think the initial protests prior to the No King's Day protests that I saw, at least from an image perspective, God, I saw a lot of Mexican flags and very few American flags. The No King's Day image, as I mentioned earlier, I saw kind of an equal balance in the imagery, at least the pictures that were taken of the full crowds. And that made me happy because, I feel like if it's just a protest with a lot of Mexican flags or a lot of El Salvadorian flags or Guatemalan flags, the mindset of a lot of people who might be kind of in the middle on this is, well, if you love it so much there, then, why don't you go back there? That is I know that's a fucked up mentality, but that is what people think. If the goal of all of this is supposed to be, we belong here, of course, like we are here, we are part of your country, we are helping to build this country, we are just as productive as anyone else in this country. And so, that I think potentially has problems. But
it's kind of similar to some of the messaging on a lot of the signs that went more viral and were more common and popular amongst the No King's Day protests. I think one of the most popular ones that we see on social media and at the protests alike was like, no one's illegal on stolen ground. That was a very popular message. And
I don't think that's
as much as
helpful.
I agree with the understanding of that and like the idea of that, I do not think the message helps. I think kind of calling America stolen land is more inflammatory than it is helpful. I agree with the idea. I do. I agree with the message of we belong here. But again, inflammatory language is not helpful if you're trying to convince someone that you're right. It's just going to make them angry. And I think that I did see a little bit of an issue with some of the messaging kind of being, inflammatory to the sense where it kind of undercuts the what is meant to be said by the messaging on the signs. But similarly to the flag thing, where it's like we need to be able to send the right message, but if we go too far, then we're being inflammatory and we are preventing someone from listening. Because all they're seeing is like I quite literally with my own two ears, I heard people call the protests prior to No Kings, call the protests an act of war, an invasion, because they saw those few images of people waving non-American flags in front of some of the burned Waymos, or in the hands of someone who is fully face masked, wearing from head to toe, right, covered.
Yeah, those were not good looks.
No, they weren't good looks, but also, but you have to understand. I guess it's important to understand while we are angry. We can never forget what the image is, what we're looking like to other people who are not in agreement with our position, and we have to be, because if we lose sight of what we look like, what our appearance is, then we will never be successful, because we have to be aware that if we're saying something that we feel in our heart of hearts is correct and is morally right, but we look like we're about to bash your head in with a baseball bat, and we look angry and we're waving upside down burned American flags and all these things, they're not going to listen to our message. They're going to see that, because first off, pictures don't talk, and that's what they're going to do. They're going to take pictures. But more than that, even if they're there, they're not going to be listening to you. They're going to be seeing you, and they're going to be afraid. And they're going to label you as a terrorist, as a domestic terrorist, as a hoodlum. They're going to call you these names because, and by doing that, they invalidate you and invalidate anything that you might say. And it's kind of your fault, because you should be aware of what you look like and who you're talking to when you give these messages and when you're trying to make a point. You have to always think about who you're talking to, because if your point is to win, is to make someone listen to you, right, and take away something important that you want them to take away, you kind of have to be inviting. You have to invite them into your space, and you cannot do that if you are ignorant to your appearance and you just wear whatever you want, not thinking, is this going to be inflammatory? Is this language too angry? Is what I'm wearing too violent in nature, or could be interpreted as violent? Again, perfect example is like people who wear bandanas as face masks at the protest. You look like you're about to rob a train in like 1700s Red Dead Redemption style, man. Like, I don't look like someone who's going to have a healthy conversation with somebody. And I recognize that that's what I would not look like. And if I were to go and to counter protest or to have a discussion, I'm not going to dress that way, because I recognize how that will look. And that's what everyone kind of has to realize, is that when you wear things, you are representing not just yourself, but a movement. And if you want that movement to make a point and to, to get across to somebody, you have to be aware of how you're saying it, not just what you're saying.
Just fantastic points all around there. I mean, I'm just going to blow smoke up your ass right now, but that was fantastic. No, it was great. And it's such a good point about really what we talk about on this podcast, right? Is when it comes down to it, the left is divided right now between people who want to fight and people who want to win. And those are not the same things. Fighting can be involved in winning, but fighting for the sake of fighting is not winning. You're never going to just conquer everyone that disagrees with you. Like, that's just never going to be a thing. And so, at some point in time, you have to be pragmatic about, again, you said so brilliantly there, you are not just reflecting yourself, you're reflecting the entire movement when you take part in these sorts of things. And that's why when there are people who kind of hijack that, that change, the purpose, or change the dialogue, or change the visuals, it becomes a problem, and that's where that leadership vacuum comes into play. I will say, you talked about the signs. My favorite, before we move on to the next segment, my favorite was grab 'em by the midterms. I really liked that one. I really liked that one a lot. So grab them by the midterms, folks, because, that should remind you what we need to be doing. That's an actionable goal.
My favorite sign had to be, there was this like massive sign these three folks were holding up, and it was a painting. I sent this to you. It was a painting of Samuel L. Jackson in like American apparel with like an American top hat and all that, and all it says is "No kings, motherfucker." It's my favorite thing ever.
Oh man. Well, early that morning, while the protests themselves were very peaceful, we should say again, very peaceful. Early that morning, something was not peaceful, and this is the sad reality of the country we live in, but a gunman impersonating a police officer targeted 4 Minnesota Democratic legislators at their homes in suburban Minneapolis. So, Senator John Hortman and his wife Yvette were shot. Both of them survived after very serious injuries. And then former House Speaker of the Minnesota House, Melissa Hortman, and her husband, Mark, were fatally shot. And authorities say the gunman, Vance Luther Bolter, he dressed as an officer, he carried a 9mm Beretta, body armor, and left a list of nearly 70 political targets in his vehicle. Now, this led to a 36-hour statewide manhunt that did capture him. This is being called a targeted political assassination. He also attempted to target 2 additional lawmakers, but both of them fortunately escaped harm, much to the thanks of law enforcement. This is a political assassination, and this is horrifying. And the fact that this has kind of been dumped down in the news to a second story, and I know we need to talk about Israel and Iran here, and we're going to. But this is really disturbing. What we have found is, one, President Trump refused to talk to Governor Walz, and then Senator Mike Lee of Utah. This guy. This guy posts a post on Twitter. Not only does he post it, but he pins it to the top that has a picture of the shooter in his mask, and it said, "This is what happens when Marxists don't get their way." Now again, this man was not a Marxist. What we have found is he was a heavy Trump supporter. This is a right-wing extremist, is what we found. But it doesn't matter. You don't go and do these sorts of things. He then posted another one with referencing Governor Tim Walz, "Nightmare on Waltz Street," which is terrible. First of all, misspelled Walz's name. Also, that's just it's not funny. If you haven't seen the Daily Show monologue from Jon Stewart about this, anyone who's listening, I can't recommend that enough. Honestly, it's one of his best ever. And he's been known for many, but he pinpoints this issue really well. I don't give a shit whose side this person is on. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of the violence. This is ridiculous that we have come to this in this country when this is just acceptable. And the way he frames it is really interesting. The right is so obsessed with violence from undocumented immigrants, illegals, as they call them. They're obsessed that one is too many. With Lake and Riley, 1 death due to an undocumented immigrant is too many in this country. And you know what? I agree. I do. I think 1 death is too much. Now, what they're willing to do is spend hundreds of millions of dollars deporting millions of people, and, basically trying to incite civil war throughout this country. That's what they're willing to do over that. But Jon Stewart then lists off a very long stream of the mass shootings that have taken place in this country over the last 2 decades. And suddenly, one is not enough for those people of mass shootings to actually do something. Not 2, not 3, tens on tens on tens, into the hundreds now of mass shootings, with no end in sight in this country, and now political violence, where we are seeing people of both parties being targeted, and I'm sick of it. And people like Mike Lee, who Jon Stewart also says that, he met with everyone in Congress basically several years ago when he was advocating for the bill for 9/11 survivors, and firefighters, and first responders. He met with pretty much everyone, and he said that the meeting with Mike Lee was the one guy that he left, and his entire team was like, what the fuck is wrong with that guy? And this is exemplified by this horrific tweet that he refused to take down until just a few hours ago. That, again, one, not real. The guy was not a Marxist. I don't give a shit, though. Don't fucking make fun of violence in this country. I'm sick of this. This is ridiculous. And you know what? I call it out on the left, but I'm damn well going to call it out on the right because it's worse with them. And it continues to be worse with them because they continue to post things. Like that guy Paul Gosar, the representative in Arizona, who posted that video of killing Joe Biden and shooting AOC. And that man fundraised off of this. This is ridiculous. I've had enough. We have to stop with this violence. It is actually tearing us apart. And when we propagate it, and this starts from the top with Donald Trump and works its way down, but when we propagate and when we promote violence, I don't care who it is, whether they're Luigi Mangione or this guy Bolter or whoever the hell it is, it's going to spiral, and it's already spiraling. And it's going to affect all of us. It already is. It's impacting our kids. Our kids live in terror of being shot at school. Just think about that. If I hear a car backfiring, my first instinct is not, oh, that's a car backfiring. My first instinct is, holy shit, that might be a gun. Somebody trying to kill me. Why? I don't know, because you never know. They shoot up Walmarts, they shoot up schools, they shoot judges, they shoot legislators, and all sorts of innocent people are caught in the crossfire for this. It has to stop. I'm sorry to take so much time on this and rant about this, but I can't. I can't stomach this anymore. I'm so tired of violence and it just being like, oh, well, that happened today. Enough. So Jon Stewart did a better job than I did of addressing this, and I highly recommend it. It's about a 10-minute monologue. There's humor in it, but there's also, it brought me to tears at various points. That's what I have to say about this. Tyler, anything?
I mean, nothing I could say right now would be better than what you just said and how you said it. I mean, again, of course, I couldn't agree more. I think it is beyond frustrating that we are in a position in our country and, the tension is so high right now that it really feels like there's little we can do. We can sit here and beg people just to not be violent, but I feel like it just happens anyway. And that's like the saddest thing, is how powerless we feel, when it comes to trying to mitigate this thing. And I cannot help but feel like that feeling of powerlessness is a result of the widening gap in power in this country that we have lost to those people with money and business owners and things like that. Like, We have lost, as regular people, as normal folk, the average American has lost nearly all of their power to control the flow and direction our country goes in to the upper class, the 1%, the 0.01%. That's the thing. I was having this conversation with somebody earlier today as well, and we were talking. We were very much on opposite sides of the political spectrum, but that thing we could agree on that I brought up, I was like, can we just agree that like we are losing our freedom to the rich? We are completely losing our voice and our freedom and everything to these people. This is not a red or blue issue. This is an American issue. Is that there is violence in the street. Why? Because that violence was bred by who? By some mainstream media outlets, by the internet, by these spokespeople who have money and power and can fuel hate-filled thoughts and ideologies into the minds of susceptible Americans. And then those susceptible Americans act upon those thoughts that were quite literally placed into them against their will by these particular outlets and sources of political opinion. And all these sources are all tied to the same thing. They're all that upper crust, the people with the money and the power. They're pitting us against each other. And like, it feels like there's nothing we can do, because how do we fight that? Like, how do we fight the people that have literally worked for the last 50 years to disempower every American that's not them and give them everything? That's, you said it so well, but it just, I guess that's that frustration that comes out of that understanding and that cry for help and that like plead to end violence. Is like, man, I want to so badly, but like it just makes me mad because I know that the people who actually have that power, the actual power to stem the tide of violence that is happening in this country, are actually the ones that are making it more violent. They could stop it, but they're making it more violent because that's what helps their own cause. That's what fills their pockets with money. The capitalist system rewards them for turning us against each other. And so, of course, they're going to keep doing it. And that's just the most frustrating thing to me.
It's a great point, tying it into the financial thing. And you're right. The disparity of like potential for growth for the common folk, as you called us, which I love, is what's causing a lot of this anger for sure, and exacerbating the issues of race and gender, and sexual identity and all of the things that are then getting that are then causing even more violence against certain groups. But yeah, it's our leaders. Our leaders are not leading and not promoting peace. And I guess the thing that I really just want to hone in on is, yes, we on the left, we very often talk about gun control. And I believe in it 100%. I've lost people to gun violence in my life personally. And so that means a great deal to me. But gun control is not something that we're going to see in the capacity that we need. Realistically, it's not something we're going to see at the legislative level anytime soon. What we can work on is the hatred. We have to stop the hatred. And that has to be from all of us, pushing back against these forces that are trying to drive us further and further apart, the forces that you're just talking about, directing our anger towards the right people. But also, again, restraining ourselves from violence and restraining each other and trying to promote more camaraderie among our communities in our day-to-day lives. People that look different from you, people who are different from you, trying to engage respectfully with people on a day-to-day basis. We have to do that. Because, yes, the guns issue, I want it I want it handled. But that taking away the guns will not fix the hatred. We have to fix the hatred too. So, and that we can work on. We can continue to lobby for gun control. We can continue to try and win elections to be able to pass common sense gun laws that all of us, 80+% of Americans, agree on. But we have to fix the hatred problem.
And it's worthwhile to note, and again, I speak from experience, from a lot of experience with this, is that I've spoken to a lot of right-leaning people in my life. A lot of Republicans across the rightness scale, right? From moderate right to far right.
The rightness scale.
But, you know, in all those conversations that have been both productive and unproductive, there was always one thing I never failed to get them to agree with me on. One thing. And that was that there is an issue with those people who have money and power. The people with too much money and power are the common enemy. And Republicans and Democrats, progressives and conservatives alike, all of the 99% of Americans, no matter where you line up, the common folk, you will be able to agree to that. And I think we would be surprised just how much we can start conversations and start actually reuniting our parties and reuniting our people by having a message that is something we can actually agree on. And that is something we can agree on, is that there is an issue with too few people having too much money and power. It is a common denominator. And if we use that, I am certain that if we use that, we can reunite the states.
Yeah, that will either bring the country back together or it will continue to rip it further and further apart. And we have to decide which one we want to do. Really well said. Speaking of people who don't like each other, you all may have noticed that Israel launched an attack on Iran. And Iran has, of course, responded. And there now seems to be some significant confusion over whether the United States is going to get involved in a full-out war with Iran. Now, the interesting thing is that this is not like a uniformly supported idea on the right. Trump is kind of flirting with the idea of supporting a full-out war with Iran. But the right, from Marjorie Taylor Greene on to Tucker Carlson, a lot of the MAGA people to Steve Bannon, they don't like this at all. They are, again, America First people. They don't believe in foreign wars. They don't want us involved in foreign wars, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's, Israel, Iran, any of that. But then you have a lot of people, the Ted Cruzes of the world, who want to just, basically nuke the fuck out of Iran. Any opportunity to blow up a bunch of people in the Middle East seems great to these people.
Speaking of Ted Cruz, everyone has to see the interaction between him and Tucker Carlson.
I sent it to you. I was like, I watched it and I was like, again, I think you put it great. You were like, I don't know who to root for. It is watching, your two enemies fight each other, and wow, it's brutal. Honestly, Ted Cruz doesn't come out of that looking very good.
No, Ted Cruz got his butt whooped. I mean, again, and I do not like Tucker Carlson, but that man has a very long career in journalism, and has done this for a long time, and he wiped the floor with Ted Cruz. He bitch slapped him like across the table.
Journalism is a strong word for Tucker Carlson, but you are correct. But yes, so Tyler, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this conflict, but I want to frame it like this. Because I just had a student message me just a moment ago asking for my thoughts on this very issue, and I probably will give some semblance of kind of measured response back, but they said it reminds me of Stuff Happens, and Stuff Happens is a play that I teach about the justification that was given for the war in Iraq. And we're getting a lot of comparisons right now with the war in Iraq, which, for those who are not especially familiar, was over the premise of Iraq having access and Saddam Hussein having access to weapons of mass destruction that they claimed they were building. You may have seen some of the videos recently, dating back to 1995 of Benjamin Netanyahu, the leader of Israel, basically claiming that Iran is weeks away from having a nuclear weapon, months away from having the amount of plutonium, and it's just series of videos going up all the way from 95 to 98 to 2003 to 2010 to 12. I mean, it's just, it's like the prediction of the end of the earth that just doesn't seem to come. But, it is plausible, of course, that Iran may be working on a nuclear weapon, and that they may have the capabilities. Certainly we'd be in a better shape if the Trump administration had not pulled us out of the Iran nuclear deal that Obama negotiated, where we got pretty much everything we wanted. Now we're in this situation where it feels like this might be the new Iraq war, where we're getting dragged into a situation based on the word of Israel saying that they have, evidence of these, nuclear facilities and that they're so close to having a bomb, and that we might get dragged into a war, but there is no exit strategy. What happens if we do some sort of regime change in Iran, which is a big deal? What happens next? Where do we go from here? Tyler, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I have quite a few thoughts on this, and forgive me if part of these thoughts are going to kind of teeter on the edge of theory a little bit. I find it particularly interesting. Jesse, you and I have talked about this before when it just happened and what the implications might be and what the reasons might have been for this happening when it did. Now, this started with Iran breaking their nuclear promise. There's an independent group that I believe found that Iran had more than the agreed upon amount of some nuclear ingredient for making bombs. I don't know if it was plutonium or something else, but it was some ingredient that's used in the manufacturing of nuclear missiles, and they exceeded that limit. They exceeded the limit that they had agreed to have. Bibi Netanyahu decides to retaliate to this news by throwing missiles at Tehran. Now, the interesting thing is that this entire time we found out that the U.S. had been talking to Netanyahu about this very possibility, and that we don't know what the conversation looked like, but we do know that at some point there was conversations being had between these two foreign powers, and prior to Israel shooting missiles over to the capital of Iran, the U.S. had withdrawn their federal employees that had been working there prior to the attack, so that there would be no Americans, at least no Americans that are known to be there, right? Typically those associated with the federal government, no Americans that would be hurt or harmed in the attack. So this is clearly something we knew what was going to happen, or at least we were so strong and convinced was going to happen that it had us accurately, make the move to bring back all of our dignitaries and folks that were there. And now the attack is here, and now we have Trump openly talking about the possibility of joining in this attack. This is particularly interesting to me because this shows that there was at least some degree of compliance in this attack. Either recognizing it's going to happen and being okay with it, not stopping it, giving the green light in the worst possible scenario, though of course we do not know the degree of any of this. We just know that they knew it was going to happen and allowed it to happen, and are now openly supporting Israel's position in this. Like, they are not supporting Iran by any stretch of any imagination. They are 100% on Israel's side with the attack, and now openly considering attacking themselves. I don't think, like you said, I don't think that's a popular position to have. I don't think anybody, both Republicans and Democrats alike have been campaigning for the past, ever since Obama. Both sides of the party have always campaigned on, we don't do war anymore. That's not really a thing we want to do. Republicans are spinning it to say we don't want to be involved in other people's war. Democrats, taking a more just pure pacifist approach. But both of them kind of wanting the same thing. Don't want war. Bring troops back, all that stuff. So it's definitely a very unpopular opinion to want to enter a war right now with the political landscape the way it is and the economy the way it is and the money that we have the way it is. But I cannot help but think that this feels kind of proxy war-ish. This feels like a proxy war of us in a sense where we are allowing a foreign government that we align ourselves with and allowing them to take action on a country that they want to do. Like maybe Netanyahu wants to attack Iran. Like he didn't do it because he was forced to. This man wants to level the Middle East. He's kind of insane if you haven't noticed, the past few years. The guy's kind of crazy and war hungry. And this feels like the US government seeing an opportunity to take advantage of somebody, an ally, right now at least, an ally that has that sort of, hunger for war, and saying, hey man, why don't you just go and attack them, man. We won't do anything. Go ahead. It's fine. And letting them do what they want now. I think that if this is true, if this is kind of more or less a direction that it might be going, and again, this is a little speculative, just based off my understanding of the events that transpired. But if this ends up being true, I can see the U.S. really not being involved in any capacity unless Israel starts to lose and starts to be threatened by Iran, which I do not see happening. I don't see Iran getting close to hurting Israel. But I think that this also helps the U.S. in keeping Israel the aggressor, is that when and if Israel wins, whatever that means, if it means Iran's destroyed, if it means just the government's toppled, I don't know what it means, but whatever victory means for Netanyahu, it will also mean that it's Netanyahu's problem now. The U.S. kind of has an out in the sense where if they never get involved, even if they are technically involved of a sort, they can kind of shift the responsibility of what to do with a now war-torn land to a different country's responsibility, at least optically. Versus, when you look at Iraq, Afghanistan and stuff, we did all that. We were the ones there, boots in the ground, fucking shit up. So it naturally was kind of our responsibility to see some sort of transition to another governing body, right?
Yeah, I think, that's certainly what you just outlaid, I think, is what a lot of people are hoping ends up being the case, in that, we're not directly involved. Trump, on the other hand, though, is saying that he's, giving Iran ultimatums and, that he's drawing lines, that he's actively considering it.
He can do that because he is using Israel as his sword. It's more like, I can call off Israel for you if you give in to this. That's the message that I get when I read that. I read it as my attack dog is ripping you to shreds, and the only thing that's keeping him from stopping is me. I can stop him, but you have to agree to this.
Yeah, I suppose that's true, though, quite frankly, what Israel is asking for is more arms that I don't see Trump saying no to. We're going to continue to give them the arms, and the arms that they want are this very specific type of missile that we have, that we developed, that they want to use on their nuclear facilities. I also find it really interesting that Tulsi Gabbard is breaking from Trump on this. Tulsi Gabbard, you all might remember as being the director of U.S. National Intelligence, and a very kind of strange history and allegiances and all that with Tulsi Gabbard, but she in her confirmation said that she did not believe that Iran was anywhere near the capabilities of having a nuclear weapon. Trump, when they mentioned that to him, he said, well, she's wrong about that. She's wrong. But she has posted a video now out today, unsanctioned, not sanctioned by the government, just her, where she talks to the camera with kind of this spooky music, basically saying that we're on the verge of nuclear war, that we're closer to nuclear war right now than we've ever been in the past. And, she's like, I recently visited the site in Hiroshima and all of this. It's a wild video. What the fuck is going on with this government? This is what happens when you have just like incoherent messaging. No one knows what's going on. No one knows what Trump wants to do. Does he support this? Does he not support it? MAGA doesn't have one voice on this. But, I don't know, man. I'm not entirely sure that Trump isn't going to look at this and say, I can't let Netanyahu be the victor here. I have to be the victor.
So then let me ask you a question. What is Trump's goal? I mean, he knows that is not a popular opinion to want to start a war, active war. So what is his goal here? Like, what is his aim?
It's not a popular opinion in some circles. There is more popularity to it than you think, though, if you look at the numbers within the Republican Party.
So then what's his aim?
I think that the reality is Netanyahu did this because Trump was supposed to have these talks with Iran, and Netanyahu says, I don't answer to you anymore. Because we basically gave Israel a green light to do whatever the hell they wanted to do. Trump has given them a green light. People complained about Biden and whatnot, letting Israel do whatever they wanted. We've seen since the election that Israel has basically been running itself, like without any sort of restrictions. And so I think that Israel kind of undercut Trump and pissed him off because he was supposed to have these talks. And so Trump kind of saved face by being like, we were made aware, which is true, they were, but he couldn't tell them no. What did he have? What leverage did he have in that moment over Israel to say, no, don't do this? Other than to say, okay, I'm with you. And now I feel like he's so invested in the process. I don't think that Israel can do regime change in Iran by itself. I think the U.S. would have to be involved for that to happen. And if Trump's policy now is that Iran needs regime change, which is what we're hearing and then we're not hearing, who knows, that's going to require the U.S. to be involved, not just to achieve that, but then to maintain it. And again, there's no exit strategy for what we would do if we left. So I don't know if Trump has a goal other than he wants to be the person who never wants to look weak. And he wants to be the person who's viewed as, the savior of the situation. And so maybe he's trying to raise the temperature as high as possible so that he can come in and be like, I stopped a war, give me the Nobel Peace Prize. That's certainly plausible. But that's a dangerous game to be playing, to raise the temperature as much as he's doing it right now.
I would 100% agree that is fully an ego thing. It's a form of a manufactured crisis in which Trump can try and control purely to his own benefit, not for the benefit of anybody else or any other people.
Yeah, and we're going to see how it plays out, but it is scary. I mean, this is, has always been the concern with Trump. We have been almost lucky in his first term that there was no significant international foreign conflict that we had to be, involved or monitoring. Now there's multiple. And he's back. And now we're going to have to see what on earth happens with this situation. How do you de-escalate from this point where, Netanyahu is not stopping. I don't think Netanyahu's going to stop. He doesn't give a shit what the U.S. says. He doesn't give a shit what Trump says. For all the talks about how, they're buddy-buddy, they do not get along. They haven't liked each other since Netanyahu congratulated Biden for winning the election, and Trump has never forgiven him for that, which is, again, ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. It's going to be an interesting ride for sure. We will continue to see the fallout from this and the decisions that are made. This is a fast-moving situation. I mean, literally a week ago, we weren't really talking about this other than as a potential possibility of a strike. This is turning very quickly into full, all-out war, and the U.S. is involved, but not really. I mean, Ted Cruz couldn't really articulate, are we involved or are we not? No one seems to be able to.
But what we do know is that Iran understands us to be involved, which is the important and the scary thing. Whether or not we know is one thing. Iran absolutely is looking at us as if we are Israel right now. Because we are. They know it. They're not stupid. They know that we're the one orchestrating this, or rather the government of our country is, and they're looking at us saying, no. We are looking at you right now. You are in our sight. You are in our crosshairs. You stop this or we will attack you.
Yeah.
They're threatening us directly because they know that we have the control of the situation. So, even if we are confused as to what's going on, Iran certainly is not.
Yes.
And that's a very scary thing because that means that puts Americans at risk.
Well, we shall see. Can't reunite the states if we are ununiting the world. But anyway. So, should we move on to things we should all agree on?
I think so.
Great. I'll go first, if that's all right with you. I have a monologue here about COVID. And I think that...
A little late, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. But it is relevant to kind of what comes next, and I'll explain what that means. The COVID-19 pandemic was a tragedy. We can all agree on that. It was also a mess, and not just in the public health sense. This was a failure of leadership. It was a failure of communication. It's a failure of humility. And I don't care if you are in the red camp, the blue camp, the purple camp, or just trying to survive the news cycle without screaming into a pillow camp. We all lived through it. We all saw what happened, and we should all be honest about one thing. Nobody got it all right. I'm not saying that that's inherently a bad thing, but nobody got it all right. Not the left, not the right, not the scientists, not the skeptics, not the politicians, not the podcaster, not the cable news anchor, the media. None of us got it all right. The left leaned too hard into moral superiority, sometimes shutting down any dissenting voices, treating honest questions like they were dangerous misinformation, even when some of those questions turned out to be fair, even valid. You all have heard me talk before about how I got reported for saying it was possible that the COVID-19 pandemic came from a lab in Wuhan. That, at the time, was considered disinformation. It now is considered a very viable theory, if maybe not the most likely theory. But the right, meanwhile, turned skepticism into spectacle. They mocked masks, they downplayed death tolls, they made this whole personal freedom thing about ignoring public health guidance in the name of some warped idea of patriotism. And both sides, played politics when they should have been putting people first. You had governors that were making decisions based on the party's playbook, not their state's needs. You had school closures that went on way too long in so many places. You had endless finger-pointing over vaccines, mandates, stimulus checks, you name it. And the worst part of all of this to me is that nobody's really ever taken accountability or apologized. Not for the unnecessary deaths, not for the economic fallout, not for the mental health crisis, and certainly not for the kids who lost years of social development or the elderly who died alone. We just kind of moved on. Or, worse, we dug in. We hardened our sides like it was a game of capture the flag and not, like this global emergency that affected every single one of us. So here is something we should all agree on. If another pandemic hits, we cannot afford to do this again. We can't politicize the air we breathe. We can't turn public health into partisan warfare. We can't make the truth a popularity contest. We need humility from our leaders. We need transparency from our experts. And we need accountability from everyone. Everyone who had a hand in that chaos. That includes the people we voted for. Includes the people that we retweeted or that we shared the information that later ended up being false, or the people who we silenced in the course of all of this. Because if we can't even say we got some things wrong, then we're destined to get them wrong all over again. And next time we might not be so lucky. So, yeah, this is just one of those things that we should all agree on. Pandemics shouldn't have a party affiliation. And we need to remember that before it's too late.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's one of those things where I feel like the more time goes on, the more we politicize more and more things that shouldn't be politicized. I feel like that's been a trend. COVID really was like the biggest version of that. But that's been a trend for a while, of us constantly finding things and politicizing them to a point where it's like, why is this connected to politics in the first place?
Yeah.
There are so many examples of that, where we're politicizing something that quite literally kills us if we misunderstand and if we, do the wrong thing around, right? Because of politics. It has led to people dying because of that. Like, people have died because they politicized an issue and decided not to listen to actual science.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, you're absolutely right. And we have to recognize that this has been a trend that has gone on for far too long. Too long that now it's costing lives. We have to look at that and say, we have to stop politicizing things that do not need to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, the movements in certain spheres to ignore public health and, create misinformation around vaccines eventually and all of that, it killed people. And on the other side, the refusal to kind of go back to normal or to try and work towards normalcy led to a whole generation of young people. And I'm keenly aware of this because we're about to get the middle schoolers. The COVID middle schoolers are about to come into colleges now. And it's been so interesting seeing the COVID kids in college and seeing kind of where the issues are from an educational perspective as well as from a maturity and social perspective. And we're dealing with that. The downfall or the results of what happened with schools has been devastating to our country at large and devastating to our young people. We failed them. And that wasn't just the right, that was the left. And so we have to take accountability and admit that we're wrong. And I don't hear people, and I'm not even just talking about leaders. Everyone I seem to talk to thinks that their side was 100% right about COVID and that the other side was 100% wrong. That's ridiculous. Like, that's just living in a fantasy land. And so I'm tired of it, and I've wanted to talk about it for a while. It is increasingly likely that we're going to deal with another pandemic in our lifetimes. I hate to say that, but it is, because of the way the world is, because of the way travel is, all of this. Like, it's much more likely we're going to deal with one in our lifetimes than it has been in the past. And if we do the same shit over again, I don't know if we can survive it. Not just survive the pandemic, but survive the results, the results of the response to it. But what you got for us here today? Something more cheery?
I won't say it's more cheery, but it is. But I do have a thing I was thinking about today that I think everyone needs to hear, and it's kind of And this is gonna be, I spoke a little bit about the way the kind of media is portraying us, right? The media, as in these large, like multi-gazillion-dollar conglomerates owned by like one, two people. You're Rupert Murdoch, Fox News, kind of like just massive conglomerates are controlling the narrative and pitting people against people at our expense, but for their profit. And so in light of that point from earlier, my things we should all agree on is that I believe that everyone, to the best of your ability, should stop watching the news. Stop watching the news. But instead, read the news. That's my things we should all agree on. We have to stop watching news and start reading the news. Because no matter what news station you subscribe to, whether you are someone who likes to go to Fox News, or someone who likes to go to MSNBC, or someone who goes to CNN, or NPR, or OAN, I don't know, any of these places, right? Of varying degrees of quality, political correctness, and truth. But I think that one universal improvement we can do, that is not stop watching that specific person, stop going to Fox News, stop going to MSNBC, because that could be difficult. It can be difficult when you tell someone stop listening to that one news station that you have listened to your entire life. While that might be the correct thing for them to do if they want to get accurate and fair news, it's a very difficult thing for them to do. And it's a very difficult thing to convince anyone to do. They're not going to actually fulfill that. You're not going to be watching them their whole life. They will say, even if they say, yeah, okay, fine, they're going to eventually go back and do it. So I think there is an easier pre-step that we can take in this fight against the news media controlling our narrative. And that is, at the very least, start reading instead of watching. Because most of where that inflammatory language is coming from, most of where the division is coming from, is from the way newscasters and reporters and showrunners portray that information. There's a lot of things wrong with Tucker Carlson as an example, and the things that he spews on his shows. But I can say without a doubt that most of the damage, even if he is still saying factually just dangerous things, most of the damage is coming from the way he is saying those things and how they come across. The anger in his tone, the blaming attitude, right, that he says those things. And there's the same things on the left. There's plenty of examples on the left of the same thing happening. The point is that human ability to transform language into feelings can be most of the problem as to why we are so divided politically as a result of the change that the media landscape has had in the last 20 years. And I think that one small step we can take that should be easy for anyone to take regardless of political opinion is at least start reading instead of watching. If you go to Fox News, you know what? At the very least, go to foxnews.com and read the article that they're talking about instead of listening to or watching, worse yet, watching a show on Fox News and getting all of that like pre-existing motive and intentionality and emotion and cadence that's going to make you angrier. I'm not saying to stop altogether. I understand it's a very difficult thing to do. And while I would prefer you do that, I recognize that's a hard thing to do. So how about this? How about you just start by just reading them online? Get your phone out and go to foxnews.com if that's where you have to get your information. And at least read it first. Maybe, I would say that there is a good chance that you will be able to digest that information in a way that might still be problematic in many ways, because it is still Fox News in this example. But at the very least, you will be able to digest it in a way where you are not being spoon-fed a certain attitude from a personality on television to fuel your continued anger at the left or at whatever is the scapegoat of the day. I think people on the left and the right should do this. I think it can go a long way. Start reading instead of watching and see how that might transform your ability to digest the news and the opinions you might have on those stories and what's happening around the world.
It's a really interesting point, man. I do a little bit of both, to be honest with you. But I read a lot more now than I used to when in the first Trump administration, where I pretty much lived on cable news to kind of guide me. But I also think back now in the second administration, like I'm obviously petrified with what's going on in this country, but I am more motivated than I am just in a constant state of anxiety as I was in the first one. Like, yes, I'm anxious. And of course, you get through one, it makes the next one feel, like you can get through it. I'm exhausted, as we all are, with the fact that we're only 6 months in and it's already this insane. I similarly find, I think a lot of the reason as to why I am less actively, terrified all the time is because I am not watching Don Lemon every evening, for 2 hours, talk about the horrible things that are going on in the world through Don Lemon's perspective. And again, Don Lemon, flawed human being, but, I mean no disrespect here. Yeah, I find that I feel better because I'm reading more. I do think it's a tough sell because people are reading less and less and less. I tell it all the time. If you've got kids, get them to read. It's the difference. It literally is the difference between like success in from an educational perspective and otherwise. The students that can read are doing very, very well. The students that are not reading are not doing very, very well. So even if they don't like it, make them read. But yeah, it's a tough sell, man. But we have to get out of this kind of rut of hearing it through other people's lens, and start processing things on our own, having our own critical thinking. What a really interesting and very valuable bit of information there. So yes, we should all agree on this.
Thanks. Yeah. Again, great points all around. I think you made some excellent points earlier as well. I guess we will see how this progresses. We kind of have now a bunch of very, very big things happening simultaneously, both within the country and outside the country. So there certainly won't be a shortage of topics to talk about for the upcoming weeks, whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. Unfortunately, mostly a bad thing. But I think that'll do it for this week. And as always, from Los Angeles, California, my name is Tyler Ehrig.
And from Manchester, New Hampshire, I'm Jesse Saywell.
And this has been Reunited States.
When the whole world has got you down and there's no one else around, turn that frown right upside